Welcome to Sunday Sermons, brought to you by the Chapel Podcast Network. Let's grab our Bibles and open up to the book of Numbers, chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, and chapter 2, verses 1 through 9. And I'll read the first two verses for us now from chapter 1, as we prepare to hear from lead Pastor Travis Simone as he helps us kick off our summer sermon series titled, In the Wilderness. The Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, in the tent of meeting, on the first day of the second month, in the second year after they had come out of the land of Egypt, saying, Take a census of all the congregation of the people of Israel, by clans, by fathers' houses, according to the number of names, every male, head by head.
I was at a wedding yesterday, and the person I was seated next to asked me about what I did, which is always a bit of an adventure in my profession. We eventually got to the idea that I would be preaching on the book of Numbers, not just tomorrow, but for the whole summer. And much to my surprise, his face lit up. He said, my wife and I, we always enjoy it when the pastor speaks on the book of Numbers. I said, really, nobody ever said that. Especially a pastor speaking on the book of Numbers all summer. He said, yeah, we kind of giggle, we elbow each other, and then he sort of points to his name tag. Tom Numbers was the man's name. My goal this morning and throughout this summer is to teach you all that we should enjoy reading, studying, and listening to the book of Numbers as much or more than Tom Numbers and his wife. See, life often feels like a wilderness. For God's people, there is a surprise on the other side of the Red Sea. In Exodus 15:22, we read, Israel set out from the Red Sea, and they went into the wilderness. God's people did not move from rescue at the Red Sea to relaxing in the promised land. Just ponder it for a moment. They have been released from slavery. Imagine the joy. Imagine the awe at God's power to defeat the most powerful man on earth, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, the celebration, the jubilation, and then they went into the wilderness. A brief overview of Exodus 16 through 18 reveals what the Bible means by the term wilderness. First, God's people get thirsty. Next, the Amalekites attack. Then, poor governance threatens to divide the community and destroy the leaders. By the end of by the end of this 3-chapter walk through these difficult circumstances, grumbling becomes the go-to response for life in the wilderness. See, the wilderness, according to the Bible, is characterized by lack of resources and new enemies. The wilderness is the place where the way we have always done things no longer works, and where deficiencies in our character are exposed. That's the biblical paradigm for the wilderness. Life often feels like a wilderness. When we lack the resources to parent a rebellious child, heal a hurting marriage, or care for an aging spouse or parent. Life often feels like a wilderness when the new enemy of a difficult diagnosis is given, fresh legal papers are served, or surprise deployments announced. Life feels like a wilderness when the prayers that have always brought us comfort start feeling stale, and the disciplines that got us this far are no longer sufficient for the next leg of our journey. Life feels like a wilderness when the rough edges of our character refuse to go away, and the person we have become is not the person we set out to be. These And thousands more are just some of the ways life feels like a wilderness. So what do we do? How do we respond? How do we deal with these wilderness places of our lives? Ezra Klein writes for the New York Times and hosts a podcast, and he talks a lot about how he suffers from anxiety. He gets debilitated by uncertainty and fear in his life. And so like many young podcasters, he's sort of working through his life and working through his emotions on the air of the podcast. And so he invites someone on that he thinks could help him deal with this. It was a Buddhist meditation instructor. And he says to her, "What do I do when the fear overwhelms me? What do I do when I can't face the uncertainty?" And the Buddhist meditation instructor says, "Agree." You agree that you are afraid. You agree that you are uncertain. And I thought, this guy works for the New York Times and he couldn't find someone to give better advice than that? Agree? That's it? Yes, I am afraid. How does that help me? I was actually a religious studies major in undergrad. And so I can imagine how some of the different world religions would approach this problem of fear, uncertainty in these wilderness places of our lives. Islam literally means submission to the will of God. That is the central tenet of Islam, and what the definition of the word is. They seek to submit to the will of God. In other words, if you're in the wilderness, the Islamic advice might be, accept. Accept that it is God's will for you to be here. Submit to it and simply endure it. Agree that you're in the wilderness. Accept that God has placed you there and submit to it, whatever comes your way. Numbers chapter 1, verse 1, the Bible offers us something much better. The Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai. The Lord spoke to Moses where? In the wilderness. God speaks in the wilderness. The Bible declares that God has something to say in the midst of the harshest environments, driest circumstances, and the most painful realities of our lives. And so rather than simply agree, I'm in the wilderness, or accept and lay back and say, well, I'm here, there's nothing I can do, the Bible's wisdom is this: listen. Listen for God's words in the wilderness. This is the key overarching theme to the book of Numbers. Listen for God's words in the wilderness. The phrase that opens the book, "the Lord spoke to Moses," occurs 42 times. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron 4 times. The Lord spoke to Aaron alone 1 time. The Lord spoke 47 times over 36 chapters in the book of Numbers. Again, the message is right there in the first verse. The Lord spoke to Moses, where? In the wilderness. This theme was identified by God's people and then embedded in the very title of the book. The books of the Old Testament were named originally after the first word or the first significant phrase of the book. Our English title to the book of Numbers comes from the prominent census data delivered at the beginning and the end of the book. However, in Hebrew, the first title was the book's 5th word. And I'm going to put this on the top 10 list of Hebrew words you need to know, at least for this summer. The word is Bemidbar. This translates into the English phrase, in the wilderness. That's the title of the book, because Numbers invites us to listen for God's words in the wilderness. Don't simply agree, I'm in the wilderness. Don't simply accept and lay down there. Listen. Listen for God's words in the wilderness. And this summer, we'll discern at least 3 words God speaks in the wilderness places of our lives: preparation, temptation, and invitation. Preparation, verse 2, Numbers chapter 1. Take a census of all the congregation of the people of Israel by clans, by fathers' houses, according to the number of names, every male head by head. If the wilderness is characterized by lack of resources, God's first word in the wilderness is preparation. He instructs his people to take stock, to get into position and prepare the resources they do have for the journey. In Numbers 1 through 10, God prepares his people for what they're going to face on this wilderness trek to the promised land. More on this later. As we keep listening for God's words in the wilderness, the second word is about temptation. This is the largest section of the book, chapters 11 through 21. I'll go to chapter 11 now and read the first verse of the temptation section of the book. And the people complained in the hearing of the Lord about their misfortunes. The march beyond Sinai has only just begun. This is chapter 11, verse 1. They just left the wilderness of Sinai. They've just finished their preparation class with God. And the first thing we learn about the people's response to all of God's preparation for their wilderness journey is this: the people complained. Jeff Mannion, in his book, The Land Between, notes that people think the wilderness imagery of the Bible is all about barrenness, an inability to grow food. The assumption is that wilderness land is infertile land. Let me read to you what he writes about the fertility of the wilderness land. You would think that the desert would not produce anything, but the land between, that's what he calls the wilderness throughout the book, the land between is fertile ground. The land between is fertile ground for complaint. A voice can be heard when we are in this transition. A voice that says, I'm sick of this. I'm sick of living in my in-laws' basement. I'm sick of figuring out which bills to pay. I'm sick of going to the nursing home to visit mom when she doesn't know who I am. I'm sick of this. I'm sick of going to bed at night and not knowing where my 17-year-old is. I'm sick of this. Whenever we find ourselves in the land between, our soul is in danger and our heart is in danger. Our souls are in danger because the wilderness is filled with all kinds of temptation. As you work your way through Numbers chapter 11 to Numbers chapter 21, you encounter the temptation to complain, the temptation to power up, the temptation to fear, the temptation to believe you know best, the temptation to impatience, the temptation to bitterness begins to take hold of God's people, especially the temptation to disobedience. And the last temptation is the temptation to speak out against God. But interestingly enough, if the book of Numbers is fertile ground for temptation and complaint, the book of Numbers also demonstrates that the wilderness is fertile ground for God's provision. Alongside all these temptations, we see God provide manna and quail to eat, desert oases to drink. When 10 spies said they could not take the promised land, God provided the courage for 2 faithful spies to speak up. And in the face of immense pressure, not to move forward. They say, let us go up at once and occupy the land, for we are well able to overcome it. Toward the end of the book, fiery serpents create a life and death situation, and God provides a bronze serpent to heal his people. When a foreign king hires a prophet to curse God's people, God provides a talking donkey to turn the prophet around and curse the king. When Moses' disobedience disqualifies him from leading the people into the promised land, God preserves Joshua's faithfulness and provides the people with a new leader to carry them across the Jordan and out of the wilderness. This contrast between the people's complaints and God's provision helps us understand the central temptation of the book of Numbers. It's the temptation to distrust God. Listen for God's words in the wilderness: preparation, temptation, and invitation. At the end of the book, in chapter 26, another census is taken. I'll read you how the census ends. Numbers 26, verses 64 and 65. But among these, there was not one of those listed by Moses and Aaron the priest, who had listed the people of Israel in the wilderness of Sinai. For the Lord had said to them, they shall die in the wilderness. That's how the book begins to end. All of the people that were listed in the census in chapter 1 and 2, they're dead. Everyone 20 years and up, they're gone. What kind of book is this? What kind of ending is this? I mean, just ponder that for a moment. All of the adults that witnessed God's powerful rescue from slavery in Egypt, they died in the wilderness. If the wilderness requires such preparation and is filled with countless temptations, why does God lead his people there? I'm going to turn the screw a little tighter on this idea and read you one of the Bible's own descriptions of what the wilderness land is like. This is from the prophet Jeremiah, chapter 2, verse 6. Where is the Lord who brought us out of the land of Egypt, who led us in the wilderness, in a land of deserts and pits, in a land of drought and deep darkness, in a land that no one passes through and where no man dwells? If no one makes it through, then why does God bring us there? Clearly, at the end of Numbers, none of the adults, again, who made it out of Egypt, they're not dwelling there because they're all dead. That's the part they don't teach you in vacation Bible school. They're all dead, but two. Again, verse 65. For the Lord had said of them, they shall die in the wilderness. Not one of them was left, except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, the son of Nun. There are two living members of the wilderness generation at the end of the book. And they represent an alternative vision of the wilderness's potential. Joshua and Caleb were the only two members of the Exodus generation whose preparation led them to trust in the face of the temptations of the wilderness. Joshua and Caleb are alive at the end of the story as a testimony. Not only is life possible on the other side of the wilderness, transformed life is the reward for those who trust in the wilderness. God's third word is an invitation. It's an invitation to trust and transformation. This is hard to hear, but this is the clear teaching of the Bible. God intentionally places his people in life-threatening situations to demonstrate he can be trusted with their lives, to demonstrate he can be trusted to transform their lives. So whatever wilderness place you find yourself in right now, know this: it's a place of both great danger and opportunity. The Bible Project is a great organization. My wife actually works for them as a writer. They did a podcast series last year on the biblical theme of the wilderness. And the first episode was entitled, "The Wilderness, the Best Worst Place." That in the Bible, according to the biblical imagination, the wilderness is the best, worst place you can be. Again, Jeff Mannion, and I can't recommend this book highly enough for summer reading along with this series. He puts it succinctly like this: our response to God in the wilderness determines whether or not we grow or die. Listen. Listen for God's words in the wilderness. Preparation, temptation, an invitation to trust and transformation. The first part of our series will deal with the preparation aspect of the book of Numbers. I said I would come back to that. So we'll have an application for preparation this morning as we kick off our series. Commit to a community with God at the center. Back to Numbers chapter 1, verse 1 through 3. The Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, in the tent of meeting on the first day of the second month in the second year after they had come out of the land of Egypt, saying, "Take a census of all the congregation of the people of Israel by clans, by fathers' houses, according to the number of names, every male head by head." The census was for the purpose of preparing for war. Look again at some of the verbiage of verse 3. Those who were able to go to war, they were counted company by company. The census is to be taken head by head. This term was used by ancient commanders to keep a strict head count during the roll call of soldiers. In chapter 2, the term camp is used. Camp might be analogous for our word today, base. This is a fortified military encampment. The camping or fortification for each tribe is identified by standards and banners. These were like regimental flags, so the soldiers would know where their company was located. They could march in sync with the rest of the platoon. God's people, make no mistake about it, in the book of Numbers, chapter 1 and 2, they are arranged for war. However, I don't believe a faithful application of this passage would be to say, therefore, prepare for battle against the Canaanites of our day. Many people have preached that sermon, and I think God is pointing in an entirely different direction. I'll show you what's going on in verse 2 of chapter 2. As I read it, take note of the posture of this army. Where are they facing? Numbers 2:2. The people of Israel shall camp, each by his own standard, with the banners of their fathers' houses. They shall camp facing the tent of meeting on every side. Let me show you a diagram of how the camp was arranged. There are 12 tribes of Israel. There are 4 sides to the tent of meeting, 3 tribes on each side of the tent of meeting. And Numbers 2:2 is clear. They are facing which direction? They are facing toward the tent of meeting. God's people are not armed and looking out at the evil and dangers that might come their way in the wilderness. God's people with no weapons in sight face God's presence. Their backs are to the wilderness. Their backs are to Canaan. Their full focus is on God dwelling in their midst. Their full focus is on worshiping God in their midst, receiving and obeying the commandments of God in their midst, offering sacrifices and releasing their resources to God in their midst. And they are trusting God for the atonement of their sin while the Holy One of Israel resides in their midst. All this is what it means to live with God at the center of the camp. And I think the word camp is important. God's people in Numbers are not instructed to place God at the center of their individual lives. They are committed to a community with God at the center. See, we'll never survive the wilderness alone. The design of the camp in the book of Numbers reveals that God never intended us to survive in the wilderness alone. The temptations of the wilderness are too great to think that we can, through sheer willpower, prepare for the wilderness by placing God personally at the center of our individual lives. Instead, the wisdom of Numbers is to instruct us to commit to a community. As I called it last week from the book of Galatians, the new creation family called the church. We commit to this new creation family, this new creation community that has things like statements of faith, membership covenants, rhythms of worship, prayer, fellowship, serving, and gathering in small groups. Think the tribes of the book of Numbers. These things help create shape in our lives where God can reside at the center. I've mentioned recently that my wilderness journey has been helping my parents on the other side of my dad's stroke that happened at the end of September. And recently that help came to an inflection point in our journey where I moved my mom and dad from their longtime home of 43 years in Virginia Beach to Williamsburg here. And they really are enjoying being a part of the chapel family. They were at the block party on Wednesday night. But that move was arduous, emotionally, spiritually, physically, going through your parents' house, finding every little piece of your childhood along the way. One of my friends that was helping me move said, looking at all these things that were saved, your mom and dad loved you and your sister really well. And that's true. And so that day was just emotionally exhausting and physically exhausting as well, as it was at the end of May, and we had those couple of unseasonably 95-degree May days, and the air conditioning kind of went out, and the doors open, people coming in and out, and we are in there sweating, trying to pack up this home. And one day, and someone says, Travis, Nina has just been amazing to this. That's my wife, Nina. And I said, she has. I've been telling everyone, Nina needs to get some kind of in-law of the year award for everything she's been doing to help me and my parents. And someone else says, well, she's married to him. And somebody else from my small group says, I'm not married to him, and I'm here today. And we all had a good laugh. And I think that is a profound spiritual truth regarding the community that God longs for us to commit to and be a part of in the new creation family. You see, my small group showed up and loved my parents the same way Nina and I were seeking to love my parents. It's a commitment, not just to an individual personal relationship with God, but a commitment to a community that has God at the center. So as we ponder the first preparatory phase of our journey through the wilderness, I'll ask this question. What is one step you could take to deepen your commitment to the new creation family of the church? And small groups are an important part of that journey. Our associate pastor of groups will be at the Welcome Center afterwards. He's working on an event toward the end of the summer to get more people in groups. Dale South would love to speak with you. See, the idea that God speaks in the wilderness, it's not confined to the book of Numbers. It pops up in different places of Scripture. Maybe the greatest inflection point where it pops up is in Luke chapter 3, verse 2. During the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas, the word of God came to John, son of Zechariah, where? In the wilderness. See, the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness. The Lord spoke to John the Baptist in the wilderness. It's no accident that this is where the word of God first appears to John. The Lord longs to speak to you in the wilderness this summer. Listen. Listen for God's words in the wilderness. And as the word comes to John in the wilderness, the next thing that happens is Jesus shows up. Jesus shows up for the first time in the Gospels. Where? In the wilderness. Numbers is God's words in the wilderness. Jesus is the Word. Jesus is the revelation of God in the wilderness. As he shows up in the wilderness with John the Baptist, what happens first? He gets baptized. Baptized where? In the wilderness. Jesus is prepared for his mission through baptism in the wilderness. Jesus experiences temptation as the Spirit sends him deeper into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And hanging on the cross, Jesus cries out, "I thirst." He experiences the parched wilderness in his own flesh and soul. Jesus, on that cross, opens God's invitation to trust in that most barren wilderness place, declaring, "Into your hands I commit my spirit." See, in the wilderness of the cross, Jesus says, "God, I trust you with my life, even in the face of death." So that now all who place their trust in Jesus experience God's life transformation, even when life feels like a wilderness.
Thanks for joining us today. Here at the chapel, we are all about making disciples of Jesus Christ. We hope you will join us as we listen for God to speak in the wilderness and allow him to shape our lives through wilderness preparation, temptation, and invitation.